It's time for Survivor Angels, an approach to strengthen trauma survivors. Here, you can escape what draws negativity and engage your positive abilities and the gifts that you've always had. Let's activate your angels. And to help you on that journey, here's Chaplain Jodi.
There is, excuse me, a word that doesn't get used very often anymore. Discernment. It's not judgment. It's not suspicion. It's not cynicism. Discernment. And if you've survived something significant in your life, chances are this word now lives somewhere inside you, even if you've never used it out loud. Because survival does something interesting to the human mind. It sharpens it. Not the way people expect. It doesn't make you louder. It doesn't necessarily make you more confident. What it often does is make you quieter, more observant, more aware of subtle signals that other people miss. And that awareness eventually becomes something very powerful. Discernment. Discernment is not distrust. Let's start by clarifying something very important. Discernment is not distrust. Distrust assumes danger, and discernment simply notices. It notices tone before words. It notices energy before explanation. And it notices intent before performance. And that ability often grows out of necessity. Because when you've been through something destabilizing, trauma, betrayal, illness, loss, and the list goes on, your nervous system learns to read the room more carefully, not out of paranoia, out of experience. Because there's the moment you realize you see differently. There's usually a moment after survival when you realize something subtle has changed. You're in a conversation. Someone says something that everyone else seems to accept easily. But something inside you pauses. It's not dramatic, just a quiet internal signal. Something about the tone doesn't match the words. Something about the story doesn't quite line up. And suddenly you realize you're noticing layers. That moment can feel uncomfortable at first because our culture encourages quick agreement, quick opinions, quick certainty. Discernment slows everything down. And that's what we need more of because the world right now moves very fast. Look around at the cultural climate that we're living in. Information moves faster than it ever has in human history. Social media delivers opinions instantly. News spreads globally within minutes. And people are expected to react immediately. But reacting quickly and seeing clearly are not the same thing. In fact, the faster the world moves, the more valuable discernment becomes. Because discernment requires something that modern culture rarely offers. Pause. I call it the pause. Because there's the cost of losing discernment. When discernment disappears, people become easy to influence. It's prevalent right now. They believe headlines without reading articles. They repeat information without checking sources. Valuable, quality sources. sources that might differ from what you're thinking or believing. Instead, they trust charisma instead of character. We've seen this happen repeatedly in recent years, even decades. This has been going on for a good while. False information spreading online, public figures rising quickly through personality instead of wisdom, movements forming around emotion rather than clarity, thinking through your heart rather than your head. You need both your heart and your head in balance. None of this is new in human history, but the speed is new. And speed makes discernment harder. That's where survivors often develop that discernment earlier. One unexpected result of trauma or crisis is the development of emotional intelligence. Let me say that again. One unexpected result of trauma or crisis is the development of emotional intelligence. You see, when you've been hurt, misled, or destabilized in some way, you begin paying closer attention. You learn to recognize patterns. You learn that what people say is not always the same as what they do. What's that old saying? Don't do as I say, do as I do. You learn that truth often lives in the space between words. And this awareness doesn't always feel like a gift at first. Sometimes it feels like a distance. In fact, you may find yourself listening differently in conversations, observing more, speaking less. But over time, you begin to realize something very important. Discernment is not isolation, it's clarity. And then we have discernment and spiritual experience. This season, we've talked about angels, about subtle protection, about synchronicities, and about the thinning of the veil after trauma. All of these experiences require discernment. Without it, people can drift into fantasy. Without it, spiritual awareness, or with it, I should say, spiritual awareness remains grounded. We need to stay grounded. Discernment asks the simple questions. Is this stabilizing or destabilizing? Is this bringing clarity or confusion? Is this expanding compassion or feeding ego? True spiritual awareness always deepens humility. If it inflates identity, something has gone wrong. History is full of discernment stories. Across cultures and centuries, the people most respected for wisdom shared one quality: discernment. The ancient Greek philosophers valued phronesis, practical wisdom. Buddhist teachings emphasize right understanding. And then there's Christian monastic traditions that spoke often about discernment of spirits, not supernatural obsession. Just careful attention to what produces peace versus what produces chaos. Even indigenous traditions around the world emphasize listening very carefully to subtle signs from nature and community. Discernment has always been humanity's quiet compass. Discernment feels lonely sometimes. One challenge of discernment is that it often separates you slightly from the crowd. Not dramatically, but just enough that you notice when others move quickly towards certainty. You may find yourself waiting, watching, letting information unfold before forming an opinion. That patience can look like hesitation to people who are used to fast reactions. But patience is often where clarity grows. I love to sit and talk to my dad. He would sit and think about his response before giving it because he wanted to go through and assess all the different channels of information that he had available to him. He was a very wise man who used discernment very well. There is a difference between intuition and discernment. These two words often get confused. Intuition is immediate. Intuition is generally your angels giving you a message. Discernment is reflective. Intuition senses very quickly, while discernment examines carefully. They work together, though, but they are not the same. A feeling might alert you to something. Discernment helps you understand whether that feeling is accurate. As I said a few minutes ago, discernment requires humility. Here's something that doesn't get said often enough. Discernment requires the willingness to be wrong. There is no shame in being wrong. If you assume every perception you have is correct, then discernment disappears. That's when it becomes judgment. Real discernment, real discernment stays curious. It gathers more information. It don't goes with the first bits that it's fed. It waits. Sometimes it even revises itself. And it's humility that protects discernment from turning into arrogance. Unless you're a narcissist. There's a whole lot more help needed there. There's a very definite cultural need for discernment. Right now, the world desperately needs people who can think clearly. People who resist emotional manipulation. It's rampant, especially by politicians all across the globe. People who ask questions instead of repeating slogans. Don't just repeat something you've heard. Ask questions. Because discernment is not about winning arguments. It's about protecting truth. And truth rarely appears in loud environments. It appears in stillness. This is where the role of survivors comes in. Survivors have a unique contribution to this moment in history. They know what instability feels like. They know what it costs when people ignore warning signs, and they know how quickly life can change. Because of that, survivors often carry a quiet sensitivity to truth. Not perfection, just attentiveness. And that attentiveness can become a stabilizing force for others, especially those closest around. Discernment is a form of protection. When people think about protection, they often imagine dramatic rescue. But most protection happens very quietly. Discernment protects relationships by revealing character. I go by a person's character over anything else. What's their integrity level? Are they more interested in truth or popularity? Discernment protects decisions by slowing impulsivity. Discernment protects communities by questioning false narratives. Yes, whole communities. And spiritually, discernment protects awareness from drifting into illusion. There's a quiet authority of discernment. Authority today is often associated with visibility, followers, platforms, recognition. But the most reliable authority often looks different. It's quiet, measured, thoughtful. It doesn't rush to dominate conversations. Instead, it speaks when something meaningful needs to be said. It's not to hear yourself talk. Discernment naturally creates that kind of authority, not through control, through clarity. It's a simple practice. If you want to strengthen discernment, start with something simple. Pause. Pause before reacting, before responding, and ask yourself 3 questions. Is this information verified? Is my reaction emotional or is it thoughtful? Will responding immediately improve anything? Most of the time, the answer will guide you toward patience. And patience is where discernment grows. So let me just close here by saying, if you've survived something difficult, there's a very good chance you've developed discernment without even realizing it. You notice tone. You notice inconsistencies. You notice when something doesn't feel grounded. That awareness is not a burden. It's a responsibility, not to control the world, but to move through it with clarity. Discernment doesn't require certainty. It requires attention. And attention, when paired with humility, becomes wisdom. Thank you for being here. In the next episode, we'll talk about something that naturally follows discernment. What it means to trust yourself again after survival. Because clarity is powerful, but self-trust is what allows you to live from it. So until next time, stay grounded, stay observant, and activate your angels.
Thanks again for joining Chaplain Jodi on Survivor Angels. For more information, go to chaplainjodi.me. That's chaplainjodi.me. And on Facebook at Survivor Angels-Chaplain Jodi. This is Dave Schrader. Until next time, sending you off to activate your angels.